Hello, this is Timmy, and since I left you on a cliffhanger last time, I'm going to make this quick. I'm not telling you to do acid. That's not what this show's about. Please don't think you're going to trip forever if you take acid. There we go. Here's the next episode. It is called A Different Mind.
Okay, listen. How's $20,000? Hey, that's my last offer. How's that?
I drew within myself, feeling myself drop into level upon level of reality. Somehow I'd entered his brain without realizing it, and now I was trapped, unable to speak. I curled into a ball, growing with every instant smaller and smaller, first shrinking into the size of a small rat, and then a beetle, and then an ant, then a bacteria, until I was falling through layer upon layer of an atom's shell in a raging torrent of light. He kept trying to talk to me. My physical body, of which I was only able to become intermittently aware, stared on, my pupils the size of pins, and my breathing almost stopped. I tried to pull back, to latch onto the idea of being a person somewhere who existed. I felt myself pull away from the subatomic hell into which I was falling, my astral form glowing and filling with energy. I rose from off of the ground, and in that strange black-skied world in which I found myself, took hold of him by the shoulders. I remembered the terror that the manager had felt of being trapped inside of my head. Now I was in his shoes. Trapped inside of an alien world, a place that Mick had known, but only Mick. Mick had a soul, but it was a different soul. He had a mind, but it was a different mind. His consciousness, all the machinery of his brain, all worked towards one common goal, unmoved by emotion, sympathy, or attachment. And so I'd slipped in unaware. Calloway had wanted to be this sort of person, but he couldn't. He retained a sense of guilt, and it was onto that I'd been able to latch. But there was nothing in this world inside of Mick that I could identify with. He froze as he felt me touch him. I pulled him out of his body. What the hell? The two of us, physically, only stood in the middle of the pasture, unmoving. I stood on top of him and held him down before he threw me off, catapulting me across the farm. Both of us could see our physical forms like holograms in the space between us.
Who are you?
He asked, enraged yet terrified. My name is John. I shut my eyes and breathed slowly, trying to understand the place in which I found myself. Before I could manage to, Mick threw a punch at the side of my face, sending me careening for the ground. He kicked me over and over as I lay there twitching. I know about Carla, I said. He froze.
Who the hell told you about that? What did you put in my drink? Is this LSD? What is this?
I'm inside of your head, I told him. I know everything about you, and there's nothing you can do to stop me. He started shaking and lifted me over his head, throwing me towards the old barn. Landing just beside the entrance and wincing with pain, I struggled to pick myself back up. The only way I could defeat him here was if I could somehow bend the contours of his mind. But it was also foreign to me, a bleak and uncontrollable landscape. He threw me back through the doors to the barn and retrieved a pitchfork leaning against the wall.
Look, I don't know who you think you're fucking with, but you've got 10 seconds to get me out of here before I call the cops and get you thrown in jail for possession with intent.
I slowly stood up, feeling myself weak in the knees. He was feeding off my emotion, feeding off my desire to help him or to hurt him, to have anything to do with him. I needed to establish the boundary between our minds. I pushed outward with all the force that I had in my body and began to open a small field of normalcy against the blank white and red interior of the barn. My body turned back to normal. His pitchfork melted as he shoved it through to me. Calming myself down and emboldened, I stretched out the extent of my mind inside of his. I could feel him growing terrified, feeling invaded and deeply threatened. He backed away slowly from the growing boundary line.
Get out of here,
he said, throwing my shovel in my direction. Again it melted. I had him in a corner. Only a small radius extended from me, and though it successfully contained him, its maintenance took the full extent of my energy.
What do you want?
He asked. I hadn't considered the question. I didn't know. Well, He bit his lip, expecting me to blackmail him with information about the affair. Here's how it all started. I sat down and motioned for him to do the same. I fell asleep in the bushes by your dad's ranch. And when I started to dream, my consciousness left my body, and I flew around town for a little while. And eventually I came back and I saw a cow. I saw a cow. And the cow looked really neat. And so I touched it. I touched the cow and it ran to the pasture where all the mushrooms were growing. And the mushrooms thought it was an evil spirit, but they eventually realized it was just a unique sort of human, since they recognized the ancestral presence of the ergo fungus, which can make people, they use that to make the LSD. And the mushrooms made me talk to your dad about coming out and spending more time with the cows. That's where we are now.
So what do you want?
He demanded impatiently. I wanted to see if you were taking good care of your dad.
Why? Are you after his money?
Is that all you think about? For the last time, I don't want any money.
Look.
He stood up.
As far as I am concerned, buddy, there's two things that make a guy want to do something. Either he wants to fuck, or he wants some fucking money.
Don't you ever get exhausted of thinking that way? I asked, trying to press outward and bring him into my mind, where I felt sure I would have the upper hand. He could see the boundaries growing and felt himself become defeated. Mick felt certain if he could give me money, I'd cut with the crap and leave him alone. I gave up on money, I said, trying to transmit my memories into his mind. As he saw them, he felt completely baffled.
Oh God, you must be so miserable,
he said, as the heat of the boundary line singed his feet, backing him further into the corner.
You must just be some kind of psycho. You must just get off going inside of people's heads and torturing them like this.
I felt his own resolve weaken, and with one intense push, I forced myself outwards. In a brilliant explosion of color and light, I felt myself bursting out of his head, carrying his consciousness along with me. He looked around him with dread and screamed as he entered my mind. Falling down an endless tunnel into the heart of my brain, he shrieked and flailed for the walls. Now fully in control, I tried to release memories, hints of past crimes, hints of the damage he'd done to other people. I tried to force him to feel something. Anything. He only screamed, falling deeper and deeper, his mind with no greater thought than that somehow I'd bested him. It wasn't working. Trying a new approach, I wrapped my mind around his consciousness and drug him into a place I'd retrieved from his memories. His office. He lifted his head slowly from his desk. Certain suddenly that it had all been a dream, he rubbed his forehead. Surrounding him as an omniscient force in the dream world, I made his phone ring. He picked it up, heart still pounding from the awful nightmare.
Hello? This is Mickey Parker from Sacred Mercy Federal Credit Union. How can I help you today?
Hey, Mick, this is Miranda.
Miranda? What are you calling me for?
Look, Gavin and I are heading to town. We just talked to Dad. He wants to make things right with Gavin. We were gonna have a family meeting.
Mick froze. This meant that not only would Gavin be added to the will, but probably Miranda.
Well, what do you mean a family meeting, Miranda? Gavin turned into a pervert, and you enabled him.
Please, Mick, don't make this difficult.
Don't make this difficult, Miranda.
A knock came at his door.
Just a minute,
he said, breathing heavily and switching his voice to a whisper.
Listen, Miranda, I don't know what you're trying to do.
The knock came again, louder this time.
Just a goddamn minute, I'm on the phone,
he shouted.
Miranda, I've been here, bending over backwards trying to take care of Dad, while you've been out there and...
Oh, really, Mick? Really? You've been bending over backwards, huh? Then why did Dad tell me you keep forgetting to bring him the right food? I just talked to him. You know, you'll be lucky to stay on the will at this rate.
Mick's heart began pounding and he hyperventilated and raged.
Police, open up!
A voice behind the door said,
I need to go. Call me in 15 minutes.
The room seemed to stretch as he approached the door. He felt like he might be going crazy. A million thoughts ran through his mind at once. He couldn't keep track of them. Trembling, he reached for the doorknob, and turning it with an eerie creak, opened the door to see 2 police officers, along with a crowd of workers at his office intermixed with people he'd tried to destroy. His intern stood in front, crying.
Mickey Byron Parker, you are being arrested for sexual harassment, securities fraud, embezzlement, and tax evasion. Your intern here told us everything.
His eyes went wide as the crowd of people before him started to boo and the police read him his rights. 2 steel handcuffs went around his arms as he was led outside. His wife and another one of his mistresses sat solemnly watching him march towards the police car. He woke up, pulling himself out of bed in a motel room. It was only a dream. His heart still pounded. He still trembled and felt a strange, empty feeling in his stomach. And he spoke to him, closing in on him from all sides.
You're dead, Mickey,
I whispered. His eyes darted back and forth.
Who's that?
You know who I am,
I said, his mind filling in the gaps.
You're dead.
How?
Your wife found out what you'd done,
I said.
She found out you were cheating on her with another woman. The 2 of them worked together.
No, this can't be happening.
If you don't believe me, why don't you go take a look at yourself?
Unsteady, he got out of bed, looking in a shattered mirror to see no reflection staring back. A bloodstain spread out into the mattress's blankets. He cautiously moved towards the bathroom, at which point a wretched and putrid stench overtook his nostrils and made him almost gag.
Go in,
I urged him.
See it for yourself.
His heart pounding and his mind overcome with dread, he slowly opened up the door to the bathroom. Inside the tub, a corpse riddled with stab wounds, a plastic bag over its head, reclined. It was him.
I wouldn't look in the toilet, though,
I said. They cut off your, well, you can imagine. He ran out of the bathroom, screaming and heading for the door. You can't leave, Mick. You're a ghost now. Every day, you'll just relive the way you died. It's 3 p.m. now. You've got 2 hours.
Let me out! 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 Let me out!
He screamed, pulling on the door. Another guest, looking suspiciously at the muffled, ghostly sounds coming from the room, passed by.
This is a dream. I'm dreaming. I'm dreaming.
Then what does that make me, Mick? You don't mean to say you feel guilty? He looked around, suddenly cognizant of the hallucinogenic nature of his surroundings. Everything seemed to melt, and he was standing alone in a pale grassy field inside of my mind. He could remember the dream, and knew that he was trapped inside of me, but he couldn't fathom how he could escape. I approached him, cautiously, grimly aware that little had changed within him. He pointed at me.
You.
And he began to run towards me, holding a knife in his hand. Terrified, I pushed him out. A great wind drove him skyward and ripped him into the night sky. He catapulted out of my head and into his own, in a flurry of red shapes. Unwittingly, I found myself pulled along. I struggled against his gravity and tried to reach back for my own head. The two of us were strung out between one another's eyes like tangled yarn, both of us bordering on convulsion as we fought for control over our bodies. I caught the rim of my skull to try to pry myself back into my head, gripping the edges of my eye socket and pulling with all my might back into myself. Something gave way behind me. What felt like a knot slowly coming untied, and I shot through a tunnel of blinding fractal light until I reached the center of my consciousness, where I gradually gained control of my body. All over my skin, what felt like infinitesimal shards of burning hot glass shredded through my arms and legs and chest in searing waves of pain. I forced my way against the paralysis, the sounds of screaming filling my senses on all levels. Overwhelmed, I drifted above my body, completely dissociated, and the pain subsided. I watched my physical form convulse underneath the glowing astral form. I was a galaxy of cosmic light. The world around me teetered between hideous and beautiful, painful and ecstatic. Waves of color and sound shimmered in the air around me. I observed Mick slowly coming to his senses. Falling to his knees, he gritted his teeth down against each other. He couldn't stop himself. He couldn't control any of his actions. His stomach sank with the unease of serotonin sickness. His breathing was labored and his heart pounding. Behind his bloodshot eyes, an animalistic and primal rage loomed. "Honey," called Cassandra from the house, seeing that the two of us both had suddenly collapsed. She was nervous, but on another level, almost glad to think of Mick suffering. Eager to awaken myself to try and cover up what had happened, I drifted downwards to my body, settling on my skull and pushing inwards. I began to draw into myself before something pushed me out. I tried again. This time in even greater resistance. Pushing up on its arms, my body began to stand, its knees shaking. As a cloud, I rose up, looking down on the scenario and trying to understand what had happened. A thin, barely perceptible red line swung between Mick's head and my own. I peered through Mick's mind. It was overwhelmed with a wordless rage, a viciousness even more savage than it had been before. My own mind, on the other hand, cooed with inchoate words and pleasantries. Ba-ba-da-da-da, ma-da-ba-da, ma-da-ba-da, good neighbors. Say, isn't that wonderful? Ha! Imagine that. No, weaker. Coming to its feet, my body stared at Mick. Me. That is me.
Sorry.
I helped Mick up.
Recording.
Mick breathed heavily, thirsty for blood.
Now we're making noise.
The two of their eyes locked, and Mick recognized what it saw behind him. A piece of himself inside of another body.
However you take that to be. I floated
Honey?
downwards, closer and
Are
closer.
you okay?
Cassandra called out. Mick roared, flipping her off.
Go to hell!
From even the illusion of a conscience.
My own body stared solemnly at Mick as he did so.
Gerry urged the children.
Cassandra
along with
had never
Cassandra
seen this
and
part
my
of her
body
husband.
to take shelter in
It
one of the
terrified
rooms
her.
where he got the shotgun.
Did you
Friend
hurt yourself?
Of the old one.
Mick picked up a stone from
We
the ground and
perceive
threw
you
it
are
at
in a
her.
great
She
amount
squealed,
of distress.
scurrying out of the way before it could hit her.
Voices of
Instead, it
mushrooms
bounced through the door and hit the leg of the table.
told them, "The man
One of the
pounding
children
on the door
inside
with the knife
screamed.
has locked me
Mick,
out of
what the
house.
hell are you
Wants to
doing?
kill the old man and
She
swallow
yelled,
all
red
the
in the
knife
face.
You
Mick charged
must
towards
help me
her.
stop him.
Jerry, with
Bald
uncertainty, peeked out
monkey
the window
with
as
the knife
Cassandra
once
dove inside.
communed with us.
Call the
The
ambulance.
words of
Something's
the
wrong
few.
with him.
And we found
She
him to
said.
be
I
arrogant.
watched
and
helplessly as my
dull.
own body grabbed Mick by the arm.
The kind
Mick
buffalo
glared at
do
him
not like
before
him
leaning back to
either,
punch my body in the
nor his
face.
partner,
Foreseeing
nor
his move, my
spawn.
body, controlled by some other part of
We
Mick's
shall
mind, now
teach him.
detached from his brain,
Moved
stepped
into
back
action.
and kicked Mick in the shin, catching him
Moved
off
into action.
balance.
The mushrooms began to glow.
Stay away from her, it said from my body.
All at once, the cows lifted their heads from the ground.
Panting,
and moved
Mick
slowly
stared up at my
towards
body's
the
eyes
porch.
with hatred.
Towards the
I
porch.
floated in
Towards
between
the
them.
porch. Moving
Still no
towards
discernible
the
thoughts could be found coming
Mick
through
backed
Mick's
up
head.
against the door.
On the
Eyes
deepest
darting
level,
back and
it was only a thirst for
Enraged, he
blood,
lashed
for
out with
violence,
the
and for
knife,
power.
stabbing one of the cows in the eye.
But within my own body, there now lived something that Mick had only once pretended to be. an amalgamation of acceptable behaviors and deceptions now blessed with a physical shell. Inside in my brain, the fragments of Mick's consciousness had found ample ground in which they could live. The two were still connected by that tiny red line, sharing memories, but now with entirely separate identities. And they hated each other. A suddenly animate persona staring at a wild and unrestrained subconscious. And the persona thought Mick was a monster. Mick thought the persona was pathetic and weak. From the ground, Mick shot up, diving for the persona, which dodged out of the way and bolted for the house. Mick reached into his back pocket for a knife and followed. As the door locked behind the persona, Mick pounded against the door with his knife.
Let me in, you stupid bitch!
He shouted, foaming at the mouth.
Let me in!
Such senseless violence and anger required. Inside of the house, Cassandra's senses of compassion began to give way to panic. Her whole world began to crumble, her sense of security and trust in her own senses. Mick's persona looked at her through my eyes with deep concern. I seemed more friendly than I'd let on, she thought. But no, she bit back against this thought. I was from the devil. That's who'd sent me. Lucifer. She could see the demons in my eyes. She could feel them coming the moment that she saw me. My body, Mick thought, was younger. He thought he perceived lust in Cassandra's eyes, but longingly knew he could not touch her. He helped the children take cover in the room.
Your daddy looks like something happened to him,
she said.
Grandpa's trying to talk to them.
Her heart pounded as she studied the persona up and down, catching sight with wariness of its longing and trembling dark eyes, what almost seemed like a demonic energy emanating from it. Mentally, she tried to figure out whether or not Gerry had a gun in the house. The persona's senses were quickly becoming overwhelmed and began to take control of my body. The full range of power now available to it came rushing forward in a flood of images and uncontrollable thoughts. Every flailing grasp the persona tried to make to gain control over the racing energy only worsened the situation. The thoughts of others rushed into his mind in their raw form, not as coherent sentences, but as muffled words, impressions, and images. Understanding others' empathy could not be pretended into existence. It was a skill that needed to be developed. From the outside looking in, I could see that without an awareness of feeling, an understanding of other people, the power could rip a mind in two. The persona curled into the fetal position as the strength of the power began to take hold. Shutting its eyes, it saw swirls of colors and fractals which seemed unequivocally horrifying. The same images which had in my memory brought me a sense of wonder and peace. I was comfortable with mystery and comfortable with myself. Wanting to bring joy to others, that was the essence of who I was, I guess. He was a new soul in a new body that wanted to exist to escape his original self. And so the same forces which helped hold me together began to violently and inexorably tear him apart. In the house, Gerry, finding his shotgun, decided to keep it on his side. His son didn't seem to be having a stroke like he knew to recognize one, but he figured he needed some talking down. He didn't want to call the police. He wanted to calm him down so he could get him an ambulance. Gerry gave him the benefit of the doubt in some way, but he also feared that I had done something terrible to his son, and regretted that he hadn't been more forthright about his son's behavior, even with himself. Having hidden it from his mind, the thought was so dormant as to have blended in with the rest of the unconscious Milo. His wife, he thought, would have known how to handle this. Whenever Mick used to get in trouble as a kid, torturing some neighbor's cat or something like that, she'd always sit him down and give him a talking to. Gerry thought, for a long time, something might have been wrong with Mick. But his wife never thought he was right in thinking that. Accidentally, Gerry imagined, I'd uncovered the truth, vindicating him in a sense, but also unleashing a monster which for 38 years had rested dormant inside of his son. I floated downwards closer and closer to Mick. I had no notion of how to handle him. The fullest extent of my ability had only made matters worse, separating him from even the illusion of a conscience. He kicked at the door. Gerry urged the children along with Cassandra and my body to take shelter in one of the rooms while he got the shotgun.
Friend of the old one, we perceive you are in a great amount of distress.
I heard the mushrooms call out to me. Relieved, I told them. The man pounding on the door with the knife has locked me out from my body. He wants to kill the old man and slaughter all the kind buffalo. You have to help me stop him.
The bald monkey with the knife once communed with us, the lords of the field, and we found him to be arrogant and dull. The kind buffalo do not like him either, nor his partner, nor his spawn. We shall teach him.
Moved into action, the mushrooms began to glow, sending shimmers of light dancing across the field in a brilliant aurora. All at once, the cows lifted up their heads from the grass and moved slowly towards the porch, mooing ferociously. Mick backed up towards the door, his eyes darting back and forth. Enraged, he lashed out with the knife, stabbing one of the cows in the eye. The cows screamed in pain, and the mushrooms became enraged, darkening the skies and sending bright purple lightning shooting across the pasture. Mick yanked the knife out and slashed another cow across the face. The herd circled away, forming a line and running around the house, kicking up a cloud of dust. The injured cows joined them. Mick no longer needed to be taught, thought the mushrooms. He needed to be punished. It was not ordinary for the mushrooms to punish a human, not to interfere with their affairs. It was not ordinary for the mushrooms to punish a human or to interfere with their affairs. It was punishment enough, they supposed, to not be able to commune with them, and when a human angered them, they would at times refuse to protect them from the beyond and other interdimensional enemies. But they would go to great lengths to protect their flocks. Such senseless violence and anger required deep retribution, especially when it came from one who had in the past communed with the mushrooms and let their lessons lie fallow. Feverishly, I heard the mushrooms begin to chant, reaching into the deepest depths of their ancient magic, calling up a long-forgotten rite of the first bald monkeys to commune with the mushrooms in order to conjure an accursed fire. Feverishly, I heard the mushrooms begin to chant, reaching into the deepest depths of their ancient magic and calling up a long-forgotten rite of the first bald monkeys, which they used to commune with the mushrooms in order to conjure an accursed fire. A rift appeared in the sky. Tiny blue flames peered out of it. The sky above, to those not privy to the ways of the mushrooms, only began to grow slightly more cloudy. I felt my own form, as a consciousness free of a body, flicker like a candle. I struggled to take cover. Mick felt his own mind begin to be sucked into the vortex, hypnotized by the swirling colors of the circular stampede. Mick stepped out into the field and roared. The mushrooms fired at him with their bright purple lightning, which amplified his senses, sending shoots of blinding lightning and crippling pain every few seconds and making his anger grow. Just then, Megan pulled up in front of the house, waiting. She watched, confused at the strange parade of cows and the man holding a knife in front of the house, screaming at them. Strange, she supposed. But the fact that I was nowhere to be seen led her to conclude she must have been going insane anyway, and was probably imagining all this. The dream last night, and the horrific feeling of drowning that she had felt when she woke up. Now this, whatever it was, all of it led her to that dismal conclusion. She was losing grip, hallucinating. Maybe it was the weed, or the mushrooms, or any number of things she'd tried. Faced with the looming death of her grandmother, many of her high school friends overdosing on heroin, and the breakdown of her family, she'd searched the ends of the earth, looking to understand what would happen when she died. It had turned her for a while into a bit of a psychonaut before she concluded last year that it wasn't for her. Now she was convinced that everything from all those years had finally led her to complete and total insanity. She was getting ready to drive away. Hopelessly, I watched with sorrow as a tear rolled down her cheek, and she carefully took the tourmaline crystal down from the rear-view mirror.